Okay. I'm not super familiar with Zoom, so let me see.
There should be a bar with a green button on it that gives you the ability to share your screen.
I found it. Think I got it. Okay. Okay. Can you guys see that?
Yep, sure can.
Perfect. Okay. So my name is Casey Kerig. I am a board certified behavior analyst and a licensed behavior analyst in the state of Maryland. I work with autistic individuals in the community. Um, there are a lot of kids in all three counties in Southern Maryland that are diagnosed with autism, and I work with a lot of them in the Charles County area. So I did want to talk about personalized therapy super quick. That is where I work, and we are a multidisciplinary clinic. We have two physical locations, one in St. Mary's in California, and the other in Waldorf. We're in the Hamilton building. So we're right off Old Washington Road. A personalized therapy's been around for a while, and we do all the therapies, occupational, physical, speech, neurofeedback, ABA, that's what I do, applied behavior analysis, psychological services, reading and tutoring, advocacy services, and we have therapy dogs now. I personally have worked with personalized therapy for 10 years. So I've been in the field for 10 years and kind of went from the ground up in the field. So the goal for today is to kind of give a little bit of an overview of common like neurodevelopmental disorders that you may encounter potentially in some of the individuals you serve in the community. Learn about autism spectrum disorder. That primarily is like my area of expertise. I will say that I probably will talk about kids and children the majority of the time because that is the age range that I work with. But a lot of these things would work even with adults, or I mean, some of it will pertain, but not necessarily all of it. Um, Learning what common calls may come into a 911 operator that are related to a person with neurodevelopmental disorders, how to potentially keep these individuals safe, and then also how to potentially be proactive in the community if you ever have the opportunity to. So I'm not, it may be a little bit hard to kind of open the floor to ask what does anybody know about children or individuals with disabilities? Because it's a little hard for me to see like who's talking, but should we open up the floor?
Well, I can tell you that all children with disabilities are different. There's no one
Yes,
way that works the same for each and every one of them.
right. Anybody else before I keep talking?
I have two nephews with autism that I work with all the time. It can be challenging and they're definitely different.
Yeah. And it is really true that, not every individual has kind of the same areas of weakness, behavior. It looks different between, different individuals. So it's kind of a trope that is said a lot in this field, but they're like, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, and not everybody kind of fits into um, a box in generalization. Everybody is very different. So I'm gonna try and play this video. I don't know if this is gonna work. Well, this is gonna work or not. Um, this kind of brings home, oh gosh, I'm gonna have to probably pull out of here. This brings home a lot of like the main point of this. Because I know in our community we've had several instances where elopement has happened and it has resulted in, the worst case scenario. And so this is kind of giving some statistics about kind of elopement and what that looks like. I will say that the statistics regarding how many children are diagnosed with autism is old. So I will actually bring up the new statistics for that because this video is kind of old. All right, let me see. I'm gonna check if this video, I'm wondering if this, do you think the video will work or it won't, or it'll work? Like, I don't know. It's gonna be on YouTube. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with Zoom.
I've had to take and copy paste the into the YouTube directory, and then sometimes it'll work.
Boop. Okay. Okay, let's see. Now, let me. Okay.
So you have to share your sound in order for us to hear it. If you hit your stop share button and then reshare it on that screen, it allows you to pick it. There's going to be a button there that says share sound. Click that. And it should give us
Okay.
the sound.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Everybody learns first time. It'll be good.
Okay, so let's try it again.
Autistic boy who disappeared this morning has been found dead in a swimming pool.
An autistic girl drowning during a party.
Holding out hope that little John Burton Jr. had just been hiding.
Where her body was found just a couple hours ago.
An autistic boy wanders away from home and dies.
Each week we update our missing persons list. We update any casualties. And this week we did have a little boy who was killed by a train, 12 years old.
I just tried to go along the shore and I went deep. I thought maybe I had her at one point.
And then there are the stories where our children beat the odds.
I'll cry at a football game. So if you keep asking questions like that, I'll tear up here. There's a lot of emotion with this.
There you see Nadia right there as she's being carried out. What a wonderful and happy ending to this.
At NAA, we do tend to focus more on the severe side of autism.
I know, you're very frustrated.
Our autism is seizures, head banging, insomnia, crippling bowel disease, debilitating fear, overwhelming sensory dysfunction, pica, and self-injury. It defines human beings, young and old, who are severely impacted, and the families who live in constant prevention and survival mode. I've come home. National Autism Association is a parent-run organization. This issue hits home for us. My son has wandered from multiple school settings. Our president at NAA, Wendy Fournier, her daughter is an active wanderer. We know how hard it is to keep our kids safe. There's a huge lack of resources. It's why NAA has created safety initiatives like the Big Red Safety Box, our Found program, the Aware Collaboration, and autismsafety.org. Autism parents are strong. We're very dedicated.
Good, Scooby-Doo. All right. Good job. Okay.
What?
I don't know what that means. This means something. Check it out. You gonna do a little bit more? Come on. Look at the top part. Come on. Just a little one spot. All right, good.
You know, there's so little resources for these families. And what do you do when you live next to a pond and your child is constantly trying to get to the pond? We tell first responders to search water first. A lot of times our kids will not respond to verbal commands. They won't respond to their name. They won't respond to stop. So you have to just get in there and get them.
Stay there, Ryan, stay there.
You look at Ryan's story, you look at the video, you see a happy ending. You also have to look at that video and imagine if that person wasn't there with Ryan. Listen to Ryan's cries and know there were so many children who have died this way without even the ability to cry out for help. We have to learn from those children, honor their stories, make sure that it doesn't happen to other children. These deaths are preventable.
So one of the things that I really want to bring home to for everybody is that parents that have kids that elope, and that will leave the home or attempt to get out of the home, I will tell you that the majority of the families that I've ever worked with, they have done very extreme things to keep their kids in their house. I mean, it almost becomes unsafe in the other direction. And what I mean by that is there was one family that I worked with that I was basically like locked in their house with them. They had a key and a lock on the inside that had to be unlocked by a key for the door to be opened. So, and then other times there's magnetic locks that are really high up, chimes on doors, locks on everything you can find. But the hardest part about all of that is those little pieces that people will have set up in their house. I've always told parents that that is not going to keep your kid in the house. It's more to buy you time, buy you a few minutes to potentially catch them before they get out the door. Maybe there's some noise so you can hear that they're doing something that they might not need to be doing. Because things that we take for granted, like some of those small things like shutting the door all the way, making, if someone's coming or they're visiting at your home or somebody's working on something in your house and they leave the door cracked because they're coming in and out. It's small things that we kind of don't even think about from day to day. And that level, like that small little like misstep can allow for a child to elope out of a house. But I will tell you that the majority of the people that I've ever worked with, they have so many things in their home to try and prevent their kids from getting out. And sometimes those small things, they're not necessarily helpful in every situation. I've had one family that their son got out and he got on the deck, and they live in a neighborhood that has water kind of back behind their house. And they had a lock and a gate on their back deck. Well, he was determined. He jumped over that gate. He actually broke his collarbone when he did it, but he was that determined to go where he wanted to go. And so they had enough time to get to him because of all of these other things they had set up, but he still hurt himself in the process of trying to achieve what he wanted to do. So there are some resources that we're trying to kind of push out into the community. Every family that we work with that has a child that wanders or elopes, we always tell them about some of the different options that are available, like GPS wise. Aaron Star is specific to the Southern Maryland area, and they have a scholarship that is available for a GPS tracking device. I do know that once that that like scholarship runs out, you then kind of have to pay for it yourself, which it is kind of expensive. It's a big expense to continue to have like a private tracker, so to speak, through Angel Sense. But there is Project Lifesaver. Personally, I know one child that does have a Project Lifesaver bracelet. I believe his is on his ankle. But this is something that I know a lot of people don't really know about. And then the way the language is written on, I believe, like the Charles County like website and stuff, it seems like it's more for like older adults, like Alzheimer's and other things like that. But it can be for an individual with autism. And so with that Project Lifesaver, I believe that the people that are on the team are trained on how to track that radio transmission to be able to find them. And so search times are reduced instead of hours and days to minutes, and the average recovery time is less than 30 minutes. Because once you kind of report that the person's missing, I mean, it's an immediate like turning on the device to track them. And these bracelets, they don't come off. They are worn 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's why they mention ankle. And so there are, some people don't quite agree with something like that. But it's definitely one of those things that you have to kind of make the decision of if your child potentially got out or, wandered away, would that be helpful to you in that circumstance? So there's always these tips and tricks. The biggest thing I'm sure you guys have heard before is search water first. That is always, I will say the majority of the times, that's where kids are going to go. And even potentially adults. And water is just, it's multisensory. So that's part of why it's really like enticing. You can touch water, you can hear it. There's a visual component. You can splash it and make sound. So there's so many components that kids like about water. And most of the time, they don't have the safety awareness to know that water's dangerous. And the majority of them, I will say, not all of them know how to swim because parents haven't necessarily taken their child to learn how to swim. So they just don't have that sense of danger like every other child, and will go straight to whatever it is that they are wanting to get into. We mentioned traffic too, because a lot of times kids are really, well, I won't say kids, I'll say my autistic kids that I work with are very much into like things that spin. There's wheels, certain vehicles. They just seem to like really like them. They like police cars, stuff like that. So if they just want to head into traffic, that's where they're going to go. We always say that caregivers are your best source of information of where a kid's going to go, some of their interests. I mean, sometimes there's parks in people's neighborhoods, and that's where some of my families have found their kids when they've gone out, is at a park. So a caregiver is really, really vital in those situations to kind of get some hints about where to look. But water is the big one. I mean, I think it's a 91% of the fatalities when you're talking about elopement is related to water. So then other dangers that a person may be attracted to: busy roads, highways, construction sites. Interests are broad across different kids. I mean, if a kid likes trains and there's train tracks near them, that might be where they're going to be headed. We always say to ask about music, characters, fire trucks, certain things, because sometimes if you can just play those things, they might come out from wherever they are. But then you also have to contend with fears or sensory issues. So a lot of times when we're talking about searching for someone, you have lots of things going on. There's lots of people. There's people calling their name. There's dogs, there's sirens, there's a lot going on. And that can be really overwhelming too. So it's this fine, delicate balance of trying to use the things that they like, but also not being so loud and so, I guess the big just sensory overload, because you might actually drive somebody further away with that kind of a strategy. And then some individuals do not respond to their name when called. So that is something to keep in mind. Anyone that you interact with that has a disability, is that sometimes they do not respond to their name at all. So I'm mostly talking about neurodevelopmental disabilities. And so these disabilities are pretty much onset in the developmental period. So you're talking about deficits that are apparent pretty early. Personal, social, academic, occupational functioning. There are a lot of neurodevelopmental disorders that co-occur with each other. I work with a lot of individuals that not only have autism, but also have like ADHD. We also have individuals that have autism and then have like a seizure disorder. So like there's all kinds of things that kind of tend to like occur together. And so it makes it sometimes a little bit more difficult to deal with some of the like symptoms and how to approach when you have someone that has multiple diagnoses. But just being aware of that can be helpful. So the DSM-5, this is their list of their neurodevelopmental disorders. So you have intellectual disorders. So that is your intellectual developmental disorder, and then a developmental delay. Communication disorders, so language, speech, sound, stuttering, and social pragmatic communication disorder. You have autism spectrum disorder, ADHD. Then you have specific learning disorders like impairment in mathematics, written expression, and reading. Motor disorders, so a developmental coordination disorder, stereotypic movement disorder, and then tic disorders as well. So Tourette's, motor vocal tics. So those are all the neurodevelopmental disorders. And a lot of times I will say that autism tends to sometimes look like a hidden disability, because it's not like you can walk up to someone and you know exactly what they are dealing with on their day-to-day life. A lot of some of the kids that I work with, you would never know. You wouldn't know until they started talking about their special interest and can't move off the topic. Or they're really into like one thing and they know a lot about that one thing, like Kubota tractors, and they know about all of the different tractors, all of the model numbers, all of the features, and then you're like, oh, that's different. But you have some extra things that tend to also co-occur. So that epilepsy, there's a lot of anxiety when you're talking about autism spectrum disorder, around like socialization and routines and transitions. And when things are different, there's a lot of anxiety around things being different, or transitions. That's difficult. That's really hard to deal with. So autism spectrum disorder is more of like my expertise. It is characterized by like that persistent deficit in social communication and social interaction. That's really broad, but it's everything from the actual communication, like speaking to other people, but then it's also body language and realizing that when someone, kind of calls your name, usually you kind of turn in their direction and you might look at them or respond to them. Well, and with autism, that's not always the case. They're not always going to respond to you. Restrictive and repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, and or activities. And then it also affects their sensory responses, fine and gross motor skills. And when I think of sensory responses and how it kind of relates to being a first responder is I've worked with several children over the years that have a hyporeaction to pain. So they are the only time that they've ever really shown like crying, looking, they're upset and they are acting like they are hurt. One kid, it's when he needed stitches because he split his forehead open. But he's been stung by bees. He's been, I mean, broken his toenails off. Like, and in those circumstances, his parents had no idea until like they gave him a bath or they were like changing his clothes and I'm like, wait a minute, like, what is this? But he had such a he's such a high pain tolerance that they would have never known until they actually saw like the results of it. So that is something that I always mention because there's a lot of kids that just they do not react how you would expect if they were hurt. So that is something to keep in mind if you're assessing someone that they could actually be more hurt than what they are letting on because they just are not reacting in the way that someone else would. Statistically, 1 in 36 children have been identified with autism spectrum disorder in the United States. It is 4 times more common in boys than in girls. And evidence so far for it is genetic and environmental causes, but I mean, they still are researching kind of what is causing autism. So there's 3 levels that we talk about. And each of these levels kind of corresponds to what level of support a person may need. So level 1 is they require some support, but these are the type of individuals that you may never know that they have any kind of diagnosis. You really wouldn't know until something happened that you would see either their difficulty with a transition or some type of inflexibility. Like they want to go to Target, then to the grocery store versus someone who's like, oh, I don't care. We can go to either or, but they're adamant. We have to go in that order. They also appear to have decreased interest in social interactions, but typically their social skills, they just seem aloof. You're like, oh, they're a loner. So that level 1 is more than likely people you potentially walk past at any point and you would never know. Level 2 is requiring substantial support. So that is obvious deficits in verbal and nonverbal social communication, limited initiation of social interactions, and their inflexibility of behavior comes with a lot of difficulty in behavior when there is change or their restrictive repetitive behaviors are really obvious. People talk about hand flapping. They kind of correlate that with autism. And so when we're talking about hand flapping, these are individuals that are hand flapping all the time. They're out in public, they're doing it. They're just doing it over and over and over. I have kids at Pace. I have kids that they talk about their special interest and they kind of monopolize a conversation. And when you try to change the topic, they shift it right back to whatever they want to talk about. So it becomes a little bit more obvious that there may be something going on there. Might need a little bit more help when there's changes or transitions or something happens that's out of the ordinary. And level 3 is requiring very substantial support, severe deficits in verbal and nonverbal social communication skills. And these are your severe impairments in functioning. These are most often individuals who have limited communication skills. They're not vocal. They may use a communication system. If they have one, there are people that don't really know how to use a communication system, but they don't have like that vocal communication. An extreme difficulty coping with change. So when routines change or there's something different, that results in behavior that is more extreme. So that looks like self-injury or aggression towards their caregivers or property destruction. It really just depends on the individual and what their the kind of behavior that they go to when they're having difficulty with change. And then a restricted and repetitive behavior that interferes with their functioning. So they can't, sit at a table for more than a minute without engaging in one of the restrictive repetitive behaviors. And that can range from moving your fingers or looking out the side of your eyes. I mean, the restrictive repetitive behaviors can be anything you can think of, but just doing it over and over and over and over and over again. I think of YouTube. I have a lot of kids that they like the theme songs to like certain YouTube videos. So they'll go to the beginning, listen to it, go back, go to the beginning, listen to it, go back, go to the beginning, go back, and just over and over and over and over again. So that's stimming, is a repeated and unusual body movements, such as hand flapping, jumping, holding objects close to the eyes, rocking back and forth. And with that stimming, across the 3 levels, it's going to look very different. Like when we're talking about someone who has like a level 1 diagnosis, they're probably not going to be necessarily doing these things all the time. It doesn't really necessarily interfere with them speaking to someone else or getting a task done. But then when you're talking about someone who has a level 3 diagnosis, when they are engaging in some of those behaviors, they have a really hard time doing anything else but those behaviors. They just get kind of stuck in a loop, and it's hard to get them out of that to try and complete a task. And the scripting is a repetition of words, phrases, or sounds from other people's speech. A lot of times, scripts from the individuals I work with are from movies or TV shows or books. I have one kid that he can quote, what is that? There was a movie on Netflix, and it was with that lizard and the turtle that Adam Sandler voiced, the lizard. And he could recite.
It's Leo.
Yes, he could recite the entire dialogue. And then at one point, he was acting out what Leo did, I think, when he got put out into the Everglades, where he like froze and like made a noise and froze, and he would do that. And I'm like, what is that from? And then when I finally realized what it was from, I was like, okay. So I have a lot of individuals I work with that do some of those scripts, or they act things out. This same individual, he will walk down the hallway at school acting like a cowboy, like hands in his pocket, and he's walking all wide stance. And I'm like, what are you doing? But that's something he likes to do. And so he'll kind of go into like this character. And so that scripting, when it's some of those little pieces, they're funny, they're silly, but it can be so extreme that it interferes with learning, it interferes with like their back and forth conversation, especially if they're doing it with no context. Sometimes contextually it works out, but then other times they have no idea. People have no idea what's going on. That individual in particular, the guy who would do Leo, he also likes Flynn Rider. So he'd go, "Here comes the smolder," and he would like stop and like gather his face. And I'm like, okay, come on, keep it moving. We got things to do. So what could this look like to a first responder on a scene? So it could be avoiding eye contact, a child that's kind of aloof. They're not necessarily, I feel like in some circumstances, you have kids that are asking questions. They're like, look at the fire truck. They might be interested in what you're doing. But some of the individuals that I work with may not. They might have that fight or flight. There's a lot going on. They have that delay in speech and language skills, so they might not be able to communicate based upon what you're asking them, getting answers from them. We have echolalia. So kids that will repeat the same exact thing you just said. So if you said, "Hi, my name is Casey," they would say, "Hi, my name is Casey." They'll repeat the same thing back to you. Not able to express pain, and then atypical behavior. So just acting out of the ordinary in general. Sometimes when things are stressful or things are just going haywire, a lot of our the individuals I work with kind of go back into what soothes and calms them. And that's typically some of that restrictive repetitive behavior. That's that scripting. That's pacing back and forth. It just depends on whatever they tend to like, that they'll soothe themselves however they need to. And I will note this, that everybody soothes themselves in different ways. Everyone stims. It just kind of looks different when you talk about autism spectrum disorder, because they do things that people tend to view as more unacceptable in public, or it's disruptive. But everybody does things that they use to self-soothe. So some people, they move their legs up and down. Some people click pens. Some people play with their hair. Some people pick their nails. So all of those things are considered like acceptable ways that we're calming ourselves down, or we're gathering our thoughts, or however we use that type of behavior. But it's kind of it's the same thing what autistic individuals are doing, but it tends to be more disruptive, or it's people aren't as accepting of the ways that they're using to calm themselves down or gather their thoughts. So I tend to relate it to that everyone has something that they do to calm themselves down or to gather their thoughts, but it's just one is more accepted universally by the public and others are just not. Down syndrome. I don't know of anybody up here, but we have some people down in St. Mary's that have a dual diagnosis of Down syndrome and autism. So that is something in the local area that you may encounter somebody that has a dual diagnosis like that. So short stature, narrow eyes, limited hearing and vision, low muscle tone. Short and concise language is the best way to communicate with anybody that has a neurodevelopmental disorder, or because their communication skills are limited and you can't overload them. So the more words you use, it gets lost kind of in whatever's going on. So clear, concise, short language of what you need them to do, if they need to move or go somewhere else, or whatever you need them to do, using this short, concise language. Maybe scared or anxious, may need help navigating or moving around. And then I'm sure you guys are aware that, with Down syndrome, you usually have other health conditions that go along with that. And TBI, so traumatic brain injury, that is a major cause of death and disability in the United States. And so that also comes with its own set of challenges with having like amnesia, or the inability to speak and understanding the language, confusion when being asked questions. Language is a really big thing that's affected sometimes when someone has a TBI. So common calls that could come into like 911 that a first responder would be responding to is an individual wandering, they're hiding, pools, lakes, bodies of water, nervous that someone has ended up in one of them. Aggression, that is something that police tend to be called for in some circumstances. Atypical behavior, so suspicious looking behavior from an outsider's point of view. And then unfortunately, when you're talking about someone who has a neurodevelopmental disability, they're 3.5 times more likely to be abused. So someone calling for someone, or the individual calling themselves about being abused in a situation. So an eloper, when they've wandered, this again is basically showing how water is one of the biggest areas that individuals will go if they elope or they wander. And this is for autism spectrum disorder specifically, at least this is. So in or near water, non-lethal and lethal, and then in or near traffic. There was a individual who got out at a school down in St. Mary's, and they did find him up in a tree, but that kid in general, that's what he liked to do. He liked to climb trees. So they did find him in a tree. But the majority of the time, they're headed for water. So how could we keep these individuals safe if we are on scene and there's someone with a disability? There is a potential for elopement. That is, you just never know. You could come on scene and, you're dealing with, an adult that might be incapacitated, but there's a child on scene that is an eloper. And so they might just walk right off. Not all of the kids necessarily take off running. They just kind of wander quietly, just walk off. Potentially be prepared for aggressive behaviors. In some of these circumstances, they're not sure necessarily what's going on. There's a lot of commotion. There's a lot of things going on, and they don't know you. And I will tell you that I will say with the firefighters equipment, that stuff looks scary. I will fully admit that every time that I've ever been at an event where they have come and they've put on that stuff is it's terrifying. And so being prepared for an individual potentially to be aggressive, just because they don't know you and they're not sure what's going on, using a calm voice is always helpful. Lights and sirens, this is one of those things that it could be really overstimulating for someone, but then it could also be just something they're interested in. So they might not even care. So this one is almost like a call you have to make maybe on scene, because sometimes individuals like those things. The lights, the sounds, it kind of depends. Making sure that if you go on scene, asking if there's anybody with any disability or any different need that you might have to attend to in a different way. Medications, important medical information, mode of communication. Like I said, not everybody can vocally speak. So if they have a communication device, or they use sign, or there's whatever way that they are able to communicate, you may have to ask someone. Interests, that is one of the best ways to kind of draw an individual in, is what are their interests. And so it can be a little difficult sometimes, because of course you're just showing up on a scene and you're not familiar necessarily with this person, but sometimes it's worth it to just start talking about TV shows or movies or characters. Because more than likely you'll find one that they like, and that's really easy to just take a phone, pull up a video on YouTube, and we're good. We're distracted. We're able to kind of keep you in one spot with someone, and we can tend to whatever else is going on. Getting down on their level, this is more related to a child. It can be kind of, it feels like a lot of an adult standing over you trying to talk to you, but just crouching down and talking to them, and just being like approachable. And then listening to other family members and trusted friends about the individual. I know that you're not always going to have somebody that can tell you all about um, the individual, but if there is someone that could give you more information, that's going to be really helpful. So if you're dealing with an individual that you are trying to give some instructions to, short and clear phrases are going to be your best bet. And then being patient. So processing time is something that sometimes people need. So giving pauses between what you say, just a few beats, so that processing time can be given so they can process what you're asking them to do. Giving space. I will say not every person in every situation wants space. It really depends on the person. Quick movements and loud noises, again, that's going to depend on the individual. Some individuals that they don't mind. It's not that doesn't bother them, but other individuals, loud noises are the worst. They'll cover their ears, they'll stick their fingers in their ears. But others, it doesn't bother them. Avoid physical touch when possible. This I feel like is very dependent too on the individual. Allow extra time for processing. You might have to repeat phrases, but still allowing that time for processing. And then avoid using figures of speech. You kind of have to be very literal to the point, because figures of speech and some of that like roundabout language isn't very well like understood. Then making sure the person is away from dangerous or hazardous areas, if you can. And then check to see if they have an ID bracelet or anything like that, if there isn't anyone else on the scene that knows them. They might not understand social rules or basic social cues. And again, make sure they're away from a dangerous or hazardous area. Be alert that they could have an outburst. And then be aware of any aggressive motions. So this example is, say, my name is Casey. I'm a BCBA. I'm here because, and then I look different than my picture because I have equipment on. And so I'll say a lot of kids are taught very early what community helpers look like. And the problem is that we tend to see like firefighters without their helmets on. And so they look, you see their smiling face and you see those kinds of things. And I feel like the kids really internalize that. So then when they see a firefighter and they don't see their smiling face, they're like, wait a minute. You look like that, but I'm not sure. Same with like, for example, how there's different colored fire trucks. That throws kids off too. Red versus yellow, like, because we're so kind of stuck in, well, it's supposed to be red because fire trucks are red. PEX communication boards. People use these for communication. So it's pictures, symbols, words, photographs. We use it a lot of times when children or adults are nonverbal and non-vocal, so that we can understand what they need or want, and able to cut down on some frustration that may happen with difficulty in communication. So this is an example of one for like a nurse, talking to a nurse. And says many children who are non-vocal, who do not use their voice to speak, they understand what you're saying. They just can't communicate with their speech. So they use a PEC system, and whether that be high tech like an iPad or low tech like a board, so something that is just like a piece of sheet of paper, or sometimes they have them on a Velcro strip. A a lot of them can independently use a PEC system to point out or give you the items that they may be responding to you with. And so the communication system is really helpful if a child doesn't have the words, and that is a big component that could be helpful if you're on the scene and you need to have some kind of a communication system, even if it's simple, like help, or identifying like a part of the body that is hurt, things like that. And these are really simple to like find a website and make them. And they don't have to be super complicated. It can be whatever fits your needs in your ambulance, in your situations that you typically go into. This is an AAC board on a device. So this is what it would look like. And then here's another example of what it would look like if someone was typing. So here's some examples of some real life scenarios of things that have actually happened in relation to like emergency situations. So in this case right here, this house fire, he ran away during a house fire. So he just took off from his home. This one is really tragic. The boy in question, he was a big kid. He was I can't remember how old he was, but he was a really big kid. And his mom, she was a big advocate in California for autism and services, because her son was kind of in that level 3 range, and he needed a lot of support. And there was a fire in their home, and she was upstairs trying to get him out of his room, and he would not go. So she stayed with him, and they found them together. So in that situation, she couldn't get him out. He was just much bigger than her, and there was no way for her to be able to get him out. Real life scenarios for like police. In 2019, Matthew Rushin was in a multi-vehicle crash in Virginia Beach. He was he engaged in echolalia when he was speaking to the police. He was obviously under a lot of stress at that point and was misunderstood by the police at the scene of the crash. In another circumstance, mom calls the police for help. I'm assuming potentially her son might have been aggressive or something was going on, but he ended up being shot when they were calling for help. Real life scenario number 3 is lost and missing persons. There have been some examples pretty recently of that in Leonardtown. Erin Nicole Bean. So that is Erin's scholarship is for one of those tracking devices. That is for this little girl, Erin Nicole Bean. She was undiagnosed. She wandered away from her home and fell into the Patuxent River. The 10-year-old that had eloped from home and was found in the quarry. And then recently, Miles, who was found in a pond after he eloped from his home. So I wanted to open up discussion if anybody's had any experiences in the past with anybody who has had a disability, and like what worked well, what didn't, or any kind of thoughts around that.
I know for me personally, what works best is talking every step out, anything that I'm about to do. I explain what it is, why I'm doing it. I heavily involve parents or whoever it is that they totally trust. I involve them in every aspect of patient care as well. And I never lie. If I'm going to do an IV, no, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt. No, it definitely hurts. I'm never going to lie to my patients in general, but especially to the wee ones and then the wee ones with disabilities. Because when you lie to them, they remember that forever, and then you've lost their trust, and you've also kind of put a little crack in the foundation of healthcare in general for them. So when they go in the future for healthcare providers, they're going to always have a little bit of doubt and not trust into that provider as much if you start off the relationship early with lying.
Yes. So I actually have an example of this. Years ago, I had a first grader that I worked with that I believe that he ended up getting pretty sick, and he ended up being admitted into the hospital. And so they did not talk through with him what they were doing, especially like at night when they thought he was like sleeping, when in reality, I mean, he was very quick to wake up. And he would kind of fuss at them, like, what are you doing to me? Like, you're fired. Don't come back in here. I give you an F. Like, he was just very not happy with them because they just kind of came in and did whatever they needed to do, and he just was not down with that. Like, it just was. I was fired a lot by him too, but he did not, it was not a good experience for him, because then he didn't want to sleep, because he knew that they would come in at some point when they did their rounds and check on him, and he just like didn't want to be like caught off guard. And then sometimes when you have individuals that you're having to transport, and maybe you don't have someone that can ride with you, I'm sure that you probably experienced this, maybe even with some straight up just adults that don't listen, but they want to unbuckle. They want to like get up. They want to do things they're not supposed to. But I'm like, you can usually find something to be entertaining. As long as you can sell it to make it entertaining, it usually will work out. Or it buys you enough time to come up with another idea to entertain someone, or to keep them kind of distracted from trying to get up or trying to unbuckle. You usually can, if you can sell it, it usually works out for you. Let's see. So what did we learn? If anyone wants to share.
Y'all better start speaking up.
I was like, if no one wants to share, that's fine too.
Oh, no. They better share.
Anybody who wants to ask a question or wants to know more about something?
I personally thought this was amazing because I learned so much information about our lovely neurospicy, as I like to call them, people in the community.
Yes.
And definitely working with them is both challenging and rewarding at the same times. And we have to remember to kind of open our minds, and that it's not a one glove fits all situation. That each situation is going to be a bit different.
Mm-hmm. And I would tell you, there are plenty of neurodivergent people in this area. I work with them all the time. I work with a lot of parents. I mean, there's a lot. And I feel like it's becoming more apparent when things happen in the community, that there are different disabilities and different things in the community. So then not being aware, it just kind of puts you on the back foot, especially in a tense situation when you're trying to figure out like who needs help, or trying to get someone out of somewhere, and then you're having to contend with someone that you're trying to communicate with, it's not working, or you have behavior and you're like, what is going on? Because it just adds to the entire like chaos of a scene. I'm trying to think of anything else I can add.
Connor said his mic isn't working right now, but he learned that 1 in 8 people suffer from some form of autism. So that was a factoid he wasn't aware of. And actually, I just recently was diagnosed myself with autism too. So, yep, right. So that was interesting to learn that as well.
Yes, it's one of those things that I feel like a lot of people don't realize that they walk past people every day that have um autism, or I mean different diagnoses that you just would never know until something kind of happens that triggers um behavior or like an oddity, and you're like, um I'll give you a good example of that. One of my husband's friends from college, he was just like, he's rude. He's just rude. Like if I'm talking about something and I change the subject to something I want to talk about, if he doesn't want to talk about it, he just walks out. And he's like, he is rude. And he's like, he has these sports cards. And he said he doesn't organize them in the way that you think you would. He's so particular. And then eventually, come to find out, he's like, yeah, I have autism. And it was like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But then he also has I feel like the uniqueness of that is that he doesn't really get embarrassed. So he announces like college games, and he's done like a few like local sports teams where he lives. He's not embarrassed. He doesn't care. He'll listen to his recordings, whereas I don't know, I don't want to hear myself again after I've recorded something. He doesn't care. That's just like one of his things. He's not like embarrassed about it. So he just lives his best life. Any other questions? Thoughts, concerns?
Well, if not, thank you guys so much for participating. Thank you so much, Casey, for giving us this information. This was absolutely wonderful. I was thankful to attend it when you talked at 12, and I'm very thankful we were able to bring it back.